Hi, this is Jack Butler, and this video is about two things you need to ask of every teacher you have in your life, of every person whose work is something that you're taking as inspiration or direction for what you put your attention on in your life. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. The first thing is worldview. Another way of saying worldview is level of consciousness or stage of development. And if none of those words means anything to you, then I'd love for this to be an invitation for you to look into them. And you can check out my other videos, because I will have a video that talks about worldview, stage of development, level of consciousness specifically. But this is basically the deep structure of the way that anyone makes meaning in the world. So when you're looking at your teacher, what's the deep structure of how this person is experiencing life, what they value and what they put attention on? Because here's the rub. If this person is making meaning from a very different place for you, it's going to be really hard for you to apply their teachings in your life. It might be that their teachings come from a bigger worldview or a kind of more evolved or further along the stages of development than you, and that might be inspiring you, it might be pulling you in a direction of development that's valid, but it may be that it's hard for it to fully kind of land in the structure of how you make meaning in the world. You know, when we talk about grammar, then we talk about the deep in linguistics, we talk about the deep and the surface structure of grammar. So the surface structure is kind of like the specific words, but there's a deep structure to how they go together, which is what actually creates the meaning for you. Different words can be used in different contexts and they can mean different things. And this is like the deepest structure of development. And when we come into a view of development that notices that there are different levels of consciousness or different worldviews that underpin how people are in the world, you're going to want to notice what that is for your teachers, because absent that, it's either that's not going to make sense to you, or it's going to be really hard to make stick, or it could even be that it's coming from a kind of a previous level of development, which means that it's not really so relevant to you. It might be that you can shore up a few things, but it's not really your way of making meaning, you know. And I'll give you an example of this. This may sound contentious, but if we think about spiritual development, right? Think of someone like M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled. He was the first person that put this firmly on my radar. It's like there are different levels of spiritual development. There's a way of being in the world which is very absolutist, evangelical religious, which tends to have a literal understanding of God and how the world was created, and it tends to want to convert people to its way of seeing the world. And then there's a way of being in the world which is atheist, rationalist, humanist perhaps, but basically, you know, there's no God, and let's optimize and live the best life that we can according to our own kind of sense of values and decency. And then there's like a postmodern, you know, what we call spiritual but not religious, and it's post-rational, right? So it's after this atheist stage of development for most people, and it looks different than the religious thing, but often gets confused for it. And if you're in the world in this spiritual but not religious way, but you're taking teaching from someone who's in the religious pre-rational mindset, it's going to be hard for you for that to really add good value to your life, and it may in some ways even contort you, it may even regress you. So this is why understanding the developmental place that people, or developmental context that people are coming from, is really important. So the first thing is to understand worldview. Is like, how is this person's world put together? What do they think is really valuable in the world, would be a way of thinking about it. And if you're trying to get in touch with the inner most mysterious contours of your authentic emotional experience, but your teacher is coming from an evangelical conservative context, probably isn't going to work. Now, to some extent, life sorts this out for us because we have this thing called resonance, and you probably just wouldn't resonate there. But I've seen a lot of people who are in a more spiritual but not religious kind of postmodern orientation, but a lot of the most successful teachers out there come from a very modernist, or in Spiral Dynamics, orange paradigm, which is very much about the created self, not the revealed self, right? So like, how can I improve myself? How can I make myself better? How can I change my beliefs? How can I enhance my personality? How can I be more effective, efficient? These are all really valuable things, but if the edge of your development is not about creating yourself, it's about revealing yourself, you're going to be contorting yourself if you're trying to listen to those teachers. So this isn't about dismissing people, it's about just being smart. You know, if you're a PhD candidate, you can't spend your time with a biology high school teacher, right? Unless that teacher is noticing, oh, you're actually a PhD candidate, so I can put things in the PhD context. You might remember this at school. You know, in the UK system, we have GCSEs at 16, and then we have A-levels at 18. These are public examinations. And some of the things that they tell you in science when you're preparing for your GCSEs at 16, when you get into A-levels, they say, by the way, that's not true. That's just what we told you then, because that was kind of like the limit of your understanding. But now we need to deconstruct some of that understanding so we can hold a bigger context. A lot of development is like that. So if you've got someone that's want to insert programs so that you can program yourself better, but your whole orientation is about unwinding and not having programs, you've got a dilemma. But at least having the language of people coming from different worldviews, at least having a curiosity about that will help you. I used to find this in the NLP world. In my early days, I was around Tony Robbins. I was around people that would coach and study NLP, and there was just something about the whole vibe of it, the whole vibe of the way that it was held. And I'm not saying that's the only way it's held, because I've seen it held in different contexts, but the kind of dominant way that it was held, which was about kind of re-engineering people, reprogramming people, that just didn't fit with the gestalt of my understanding of being a human being. I don't think of a human being like a computer program. I hold them in more complexity and mystery than that. So it's also, I'm talking about teachers, but in any modality, and I'm using the example of NLP here, you need to find the teachers or the level of consciousness that it can come from that actually makes sense to you and that can add to your life and not just contort you into something that doesn't serve you. So one aspect is worldview, and then the second aspect is type. You need to be aware of the type of your teacher or any particular teaching. Because whole modalities or whole schools of thought can often have an unconscious type bias, which will tend to come from the founders or the founding influences. And I'm most familiar with the Enneagram system, which is a human typing system that I predominate with and I use my clients. And if you are not aware of the Enneagram or would like to know more, again, you can check out my series of videos on that. And until people wake up to the idea of their personality not being the fullest self, that there's something deeper and more essential about our true nature, oftentimes what people are doing is they're teaching you a better way to be in your personality. And that can be effective if that's the level of development that you're operating at, right? So if there are strategies that make me more money, or there's strategies that make me more efficient and save time, save energy, I want to know about those things. But if the deep context of that is it's actually making me more patterned, more anxious, more contrived about who I need to be in the world, when your edge of development is actually to do with authentic experience, getting closer to your experience, metabolizing your experience, unwinding adaptive strategies from the past, and improving your quality of beingness, you're going to want to notice if there's a type bias that is actually about modeling you into something that isn't really where the edge of your development is. So you need to be aware of your type bias, but you also want to be aware of the type bias of your teachers. Now, we can't transcend that completely. We're always going to probably have a flavor of that. We're always going to be in our personality some of the time. But this is like a spectrum. You might want to find teachers that are not super fixated in their type. The other challenge is if a teacher has a different type than you, there's a kind of native intelligence that they have that may be very difficult for you to replicate. Now, that's not to say that that person shouldn't be your teacher. You just need to be sober about some of the results that you might get. I'll give you an example. I go regularly to yoga with Sophia Diaz, who's a teacher who's in Boulder at the moment, has had a long history of being here at times in the past, and is a phenomenal human being. And the way that Sophia is in the world and the way that she feels and senses and is in her body and pauses reality is probably always going to be a little different than how I'm in the world. Right? Like we have different native intelligences, just in the same way that my scholar, my level of intellectual inquiry, my ability to discern and discriminate intellectually may be different than hers. So there's a way that I can learn from her without trying to make her way of being in the world the pedestal of what I need, the way I need to be in the world. Because a lot of life is really about knowing yourself and knowing your native intelligence. And if you can bring in other lines of intelligence or other people's ways of orienting to reality, that can really enhance your experience and it can unwind patterns that don't serve you. But you're not then falling into the view of like, that's the way I need to be in the world. Because if that person isn't your type, it's going to be really hard. And it's actually, I don't, you know, it's really hard for you to emulate, but it's actually not wise. It's like you have some native intelligence, like you were designed and wired and put together in a certain way, and you need to honor that, whilst also noticing if your personality is in there, that there might be a more essential way for you being with yourself and with your development. So be aware of type bias, because often people are unconsciously modeling personality patterns that are just adding patterning to their life rather than relaxing who they are. So, worldview and type. This is Jack Butler. I hope this was useful. If you liked this video, please like it. Please subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to being with you soon.